It was a warm afternoon in early spring, the kind of day that carried a mix of sunshine and memory. The old school hall had been cleaned up for the reunion, with long tables dressed in white cloth and rows of chairs lined neatly in front of the small stage. Balloons in the school's colors hung from the ceiling, and the faint smell of polished wood and fresh flowers filled the air. The chatter of former students echoed from every corner, laughter, small talk, the occasional burst of surprise when someone recognized an old friend. Among the crowd stood a woman named Lena. She was in her mid-30s, dressed simply but with quiet elegance. She carried herself with calm confidence, yet her eyes betrayed a hint of nervousness. It had been more than a decade since she had last stepped into this building, and every hallway seemed to whisper old memories back to her. Back in her school days, Lena had never been one of the popular ones. She was shy, soft-spoken, and often kept to herself. She wasn't bad at studies, but she was far from the teacher's favorite. Her classmates used to joke that she was the invisible student, always there but never really noticed. She didn't join the clubs, didn't volunteer to perform, and never stood out in class. She simply passed through the years quietly, like a shadow blending into the background. The reunion had been announced months earlier, and at first Lena wasn't sure she wanted to go. She had changed a lot since those awkward teenage years. Life had shaped her into someone different, someone stronger but still humble. For years she had carried memories of how easily people had dismissed her, how teachers had smiled politely but never expected much from her. She wasn't bitter about it, not anymore, but it was something she could never quite forget. Now, standing in that familiar hall, surrounded by chatter and laughter, she couldn't help but feel a strange mix of nostalgia and discomfort. Everywhere she looked, faces from her past appeared, older, rounder, but still carrying traces of who they once were. A few recognized her and waved with surprise as if they hadn't expected her to show up. She smiled back, trying not to feel out of place. The teachers sat at one of the front tables chatting among themselves. They too had aged, a few gray hairs here, a pair of reading glasses there, but their voices still carried the same tone of authority. The principal gave a short speech about how proud they were of their former students, about how everyone had grown and made their way into the world. The audience clapped politely, some with genuine emotion, others distracted by old memories. After the speech, the microphone was passed to the host, one of Lena's old classmates who had become a cheerful event organizer. "All right, everyone," he said with a grin. "Now that we've done the formal part, let's have some fun. We have a small stage, a piano, and a microphone. Who's brave enough to give us a little performance? Come on, this is a reunion. Let's see if anyone still remembers their talent." The crowd laughed. A few people volunteered. Someone sang a funny song from their teenage years. Another performed a short comedy bit. The atmosphere was light and friendly, full of nostalgia. People clapped and cheered, happy to relive the carefree energy of youth. Then, as the laughter settled, someone from the teacher's table called out jokingly, "How about Lena? She was always so quiet. Maybe she's hiding a secret talent." A few people chuckled. Lena turned, startled. She hadn't expected to be noticed, let alone called out. The host grinned and pointed toward the small piano sitting near the stage. "Hey, that's not a bad idea. Lena, why don't you come up here and play something for us?" The room erupted in light laughter and playful cheers. Some clapped, others whistled teasingly. Lena smiled awkwardly, her cheeks flushing with warmth. "Oh, I don't know," she said softly, waving her hand. "It's been a long time. Come on, just a little tune." Someone called out, "It's just for fun." A few of the teachers laughed among themselves. They remembered Lena as the quiet girl who had once tried to join the music club, but had dropped out after only a few days. At that time, she hadn't shown any promise. Her fingers had stumbled across the keys, and her confidence had faded after a few small mistakes. The piano teacher back then had been kind but firm, suggesting she try something else. Lena had never returned to that class, so when the suggestion came now, it was half a joke, half curiosity. No one truly expected anything special. They just wanted a light moment, maybe a few wrong notes, a good laugh, and a round of polite applause. Lena hesitated. For a moment, she wanted to say no. The thought of walking up there with all those eyes on her brought back flashes of her teenage self. The awkwardness, the uncertainty, the quiet laughter she used to hear behind her back. But then something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the years of silence, maybe it was the long journey she had taken since then. but she suddenly felt a calm determination rise within her. She looked at the piano, its polished surface reflecting the soft lights of the hall. It had been years since she'd last played in public. Music had become a very personal part of her life, something she did alone late at night when the world was quiet. After school, she had discovered her love for the piano all over again. She had practiced for hours, teaching herself through patience and persistence. No one knew. She never told anyone. It was her secret passion, something that gave her peace. Now, standing there, she realized this was a chance, not to show off, but to close a chapter of her past, to let go of the shy girl who had always been afraid of what others thought. "All right," she finally said with a smile. "I'll give it a try." The crowd cheered, clapping in amusement. "That's the spirit," someone shouted. A few people joked that they hoped she wouldn't break the piano. It was all in good humor, and Lena took it lightly, walking toward the stage with quiet confidence. The wooden floor creaked under her shoes as she approached the piano. The laughter behind her faded into low murmurs. She ran her hand along the instrument's edge, feeling the smoothness of the polished wood. Her heart beat faster, not from fear but from anticipation. She hadn't expected to play today, yet it felt strangely right. She pulled out the bench and sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, motionless. The audience waited, a few whispering quietly, expecting a few hesitant notes and a short, awkward attempt. The piano teacher, now older and seated near the front, watched with mild amusement. She remembered how uncoordinated Lena had been all those years ago. But as Lena sat there, something peaceful washed over her. The noise of the room seemed to fade away, replaced by the familiar stillness she always felt before playing. She took a deep breath, letting her shoulders relax. For a moment, she forgot where she was. It was just her and the piano. In her mind, she could still hear the echo of all those years of quiet practice, the countless nights she spent perfecting each chord, the mornings when she woke up early just to play before work, the times she felt lost and found comfort in the sound of the keys. Music had carried her through heartbreak, loneliness, and change. It had been her companion when no one else understood her. The hall waited, the laughter now replaced by a curious silence. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. She didn't start with a simple tune. Instead, she began to play a soft, flowing melody, one she had composed herself years ago when she had first begun to heal from her insecurities. The first few notes drifted through the hall like a whisper. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. The sound was gentle yet rich, delicate yet full of feeling. People exchanged glances. Was this the same quiet girl they once teased? The same student who could barely touch the piano keys without stumbling? Lena continued to play, unaware of their astonishment. Her fingers moved gracefully, effortlessly, as if they had always belonged there. The music built slowly, layer by layer, filling the hall with warmth. Each note carried emotion, nostalgia, strength, forgiveness. It was not just a performance. It was a story told through sound. For Lena, time no longer existed. She wasn't at a reunion anymore. She wasn't surrounded by people who once doubted her. She was simply expressing everything she had ever felt, the years of being overlooked, the long nights of self-discovery, the peace she had found in music. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the last note hung in the air like a breath that no one wanted to end. There was silence, long, heavy, complete silence. Then slowly the audience began to clap. At first softly, then louder, until the hall was filled with thunderous applause. The teachers looked at one another, stunned. Her former piano teacher stood frozen, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. No one had expected this. What began as a harmless joke had turned into something extraordinary. Lena stood, smiling quietly. She gave a small bow, then returned to her seat. People were still clapping, some calling her name, others wiping tears from their eyes. The moment felt unreal, yet completely right. For the first time, Lena didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like the shy, overlooked girl from years ago. She felt seen, not because she had proven anything to anyone, but because she had finally shared the part of herself she had kept hidden for so long. And though this was just the beginning of the evening, something deep inside her told her that nothing would ever be the same again. The applause had faded, but the feeling in the room lingered. For a few moments, no one spoke. The teachers were still exchanging surprised glances, and the students who had once laughed at Lena's quietness looked as if they were seeing her for the first time. The sound of her playing seemed to stay in the air even after it had stopped, as if the piano still carried her spirit in its strings. Lena sat back down at her table, her heart still beating fast, but not from fear, from something deeper. It was relief, pride, and disbelief all tangled together. She had not planned any of this. She hadn't come to impress anyone or to prove something. But somehow that unplanned moment had become something she would never forget. The host walked back to the microphone with a wide grin. "Well," he said, laughing nervously, "I think we all need a moment to recover from that. Lena, I don't even know what to say. You've just raised the bar way too high for the rest of us." The audience chuckled and more applause followed. Lena smiled softly, giving a small nod of thanks, but she didn't speak. She wasn't someone who liked to be in the spotlight, and she didn't need to say anything. The music had already spoken for her. As the event went on, people kept coming over to her table. Some congratulated her, some apologized for underestimating her in the past, and others just stood there in quiet admiration. It was overwhelming, but in the most beautiful way. She accepted their words politely, still feeling a little dazed. Inside, a warm calm had settled, like something inside her had finally found peace. But as the excitement settled and the performances continued, a strange thought began to rise in Lena's mind. When she had first sat at that piano, she hadn't thought about anything. Not the teachers, not the audience, not even her own fears. It had felt like something natural, like breathing. But now, as she replayed the moment in her head, she realized how close she had been to saying no. If she had listened to that small voice of doubt, that moment might never have happened. That realization stayed with her. It reminded her of how easy it is to hide behind fear, how quickly people give up on themselves because of what others once said. She had almost done it again, almost let her past decide her present. When the reunion ended, people began to take pictures and exchange numbers. The hall, which had been full of laughter and noise just hours ago, now hummed with quiet goodbyes. Some old classmates hugged, promising to stay in touch. Teachers packed up the decorations and leftover snacks. The night air outside was cool and soft when Lena finally stepped out. She walked slowly toward the parking lot, still hearing faint echoes of her performance in her head. Her hands felt light now, her heart lighter still. She thought about how different things had become. Years ago, she had left the school feeling invisible, unnoticed, unremarkable. And now she had returned and left behind something unforgettable. As she reached her car, she heard a voice behind her. "Lena!" It was the same piano teacher from all those years ago. Older now, her hair streaked with gray, but her expression gentle and warm. Lena turned and smiled. "Hello," she said softly. The teacher walked closer, her eyes still holding traces of amazement. "I can't believe what I just heard," she said, almost in a whisper. "You were wonderful." "Thank you," Lena replied. Her voice was calm, almost shy again, but there was quiet confidence in her eyes. The teacher shook her head slowly, as if still trying to understand. "You know, I remember the last time you sat at a piano in my class. You were so nervous. You barely touched the keys before giving up. I never imagined you'd go on to play like that." Lena smiled. "Neither did I," she said. "It just happened over time." There was a pause between them, filled with unspoken emotion. The teacher looked at her as if seeing a different person, not the timid student she remembered, but someone transformed by life and time. "You found something special," she said quietly. "Something that can move people." "I found peace," Lena said softly. "That's all I ever wanted." The teacher smiled, touched by the simplicity of her words. "Well, you've given us all something to remember. You reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place, to see moments like this." Lena didn't know what to say. She simply nodded, grateful. Then the teacher squeezed her hand and said, "Don't stop playing. You have a gift." As the teacher walked away, Lena stood for a while looking up at the sky. The stars were faint but steady. She thought about how far she had come, not just in music but in life. Every mistake, every doubt, every quiet evening spent alone at the piano had led her here. For so long she had believed she wasn't good enough, but tonight had changed that. Tonight she had seen herself through different eyes, not as the girl who failed, but as the woman who found her strength. The drive home was peaceful. The city lights shimmered outside her window, and soft music played on the radio. She didn't even notice what song it was. Her thoughts were too deep, too full. She thought about how easily people can be misunderstood. When she was younger, silence had made people think she had no talent, no voice. But silence had been where her music was born. It had given her the space to listen to her heart. She remembered the first time she truly fell in love with the piano. It wasn't at school or in a classroom. It was years later, when she had found an old second-hand keyboard at a local shop. It was scratched and missing a few keys, but she bought it anyway. Every night after work, she'd sit in her small apartment, headphones on, playing softly so the neighbors wouldn't hear. Those were quiet nights, lonely but comforting. She didn't need applause then. She just needed the music. There were times when she thought about giving up. Life wasn't easy. Bills, long hours, stress. But the piano had always been her refuge. It didn't judge her. It didn't care if she was tired or sad. It only responded to how she felt. And that connection had slowly shaped her into who she was now. She smiled at the thought. It was strange how life worked. How something that once embarrassed her had become the very thing that made her proud. How one small impulsive moment at a reunion could open a door she didn't even know was still closed. When she reached home, she didn't turn on the lights right away. The moonlight from the window was enough. She walked over to her piano, not fancy but well-loved. Her fingers brushed over the keys. She sat down and began to play again, softly this time, letting her thoughts flow through the notes. She wasn't trying to impress anyone now. She was just being herself. The girl who once sat in the back of the classroom, the woman who had finally found her voice through music. Each note she played was a reminder that time heals and growth happens quietly, when no one's watching. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was a message from one of her old classmates. "You were amazing tonight. I didn't even know you could play like that." Another one followed. "You made me cry. Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late to start over." Lena smiled softly. She didn't reply right away. She just played, letting the music say what words couldn't. For her, the applause wasn't the most important part. It was the feeling of being seen, not because she had changed, but because people had finally looked past what they thought they knew about her. The next morning, she woke up early. The sunlight streamed through her curtains, golden and warm. As she made her coffee, she thought about the night before. She replayed the laughter, the surprise, the applause, and then the quiet moment afterward when her old teacher had spoken to her. It felt like closure, not revenge or pride, but peace. Later that week, she received a message from the school principal. They were planning a charity event for students and wanted her to play again, this time as a guest performer. The idea made her heart race, but not with fear. She thought of all the students who might be sitting in that audience. Quiet ones, shy ones, the ones who didn't believe in themselves. Maybe her music could reach them, the way it had reached her. She typed a short reply. "I'd be honored to play." As she set her phone down, she realized how much had changed in such a short time. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about sharing something real, something that could inspire others to see themselves differently. That evening, she sat at her piano again, practicing the same melody she had played at the reunion. This time she added a few new notes, gentle, hopeful, open. Each sound felt like a step forward. She thought about how close she had been to saying no that night, and how easily the story could have gone differently. Sometimes life doesn't give you second chances, she thought. But sometimes it does, and in ways you never expect. When she finished playing, she closed her eyes and smiled. There was no audience, no applause, just the quiet hum of the piano and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. She had finally understood something that had taken her years to learn. When you stop hiding who you are, life finds ways to show you why you were meant to shine. Outside, the world was calm. The stars blinked faintly, like a silent applause from the universe. And somewhere deep inside her, Lena knew this was just the beginning. The night of the charity event arrived faster than Lena expected. The school hall looked brighter and more elegant this time, decorated with strings of soft lights that cast a golden glow over the polished floors. Rows of seats filled the room, and on the stage stood the same grand piano she had played at the reunion. It gleamed under the lights as if waiting just for her. She stood backstage taking quiet breaths. She could hear the sound of people arriving, students, parents, teachers, and some familiar faces from the reunion. The chatter was cheerful, the mood festive. She could feel the nervous energy in the air, but hers was different. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something gentler, anticipation mixed with calm. This time she wasn't here as the shy, forgotten student. She was here because they had invited her. She was here because they believed in her. That thought still amazed her. She smoothed out her simple navy dress and glanced in the small mirror near the door. Her reflection showed a woman who had learned to carry herself with quiet strength. There was no makeup to hide behind, no fancy jewelry. Just her, the same person who once sat in the back of class, invisible. The principal peeked in. "Are you ready, Lena?" She smiled softly. "Yes, ready." "Good," the principal said with a kind smile. "Everyone's very excited to hear you again." As she walked toward the stage, her footsteps echoed lightly on the wooden floor. The soft hum of the audience dimmed as she appeared. People turned, and the room filled with that same warm silence she remembered from the reunion. Some faces smiled with encouragement. Others looked curious. She reached the piano and paused for a moment, her hand resting gently on its smooth edge. The instrument felt familiar now, like an old friend. She took a deep breath and sat down, adjusting the bench just slightly. For a moment, she let herself look at the crowd. In the front row, she saw her old piano teacher again, the same gentle smile on her face. Behind her were teachers who once dismissed her, and students who used to laugh softly when she fumbled during class. None of that mattered anymore. She didn't hold it against them. Life had its way of teaching lessons to everyone, and tonight hers would come through music. She placed her hands on the keys. The microphone above the piano caught the faint sound of her breath as she began to play. The first few notes were soft, like a whisper. The sound floated through the hall, clear and pure. The crowd leaned in instinctively, drawn by the emotion behind each tone. The melody was gentle at first, almost like the voice of someone remembering a dream. It spoke of quiet beginnings, of uncertainty, of moments lost in time. Her fingers moved smoothly now, confident yet delicate. The music began to build, not loud or showy, but full of feeling. It carried warmth, sorrow, and beauty all at once. The melody rose and fell like waves, drawing the listeners into its rhythm. For Lena, everything else disappeared. She wasn't in a hall full of people. She wasn't performing for applause. She was simply speaking in the only language she truly understood, the one that didn't need words. Every chord she pressed told a part of her story. She remembered the nights she practiced alone, the tears that sometimes fell when the world felt too heavy, the small victories when she finally mastered a difficult piece. All of that flowed through her hands now, turning into music that reached beyond the stage. Her old teacher watched her closely. At one point, she wiped a tear from her eye. The expression on her face was not just pride, it was awe. It was the kind of emotion that comes when a teacher realizes a student has gone far beyond what she ever imagined. The song changed. The melody deepened, growing fuller and more passionate. The audience could feel it, the shift from soft to powerful, from doubt to certainty. The hall filled with sound, each note echoing with clarity. It wasn't the kind of performance that tried to impress with speed or volume. It was the kind that touched hearts. Some of the younger students watched with wide eyes, amazed that someone who once sat in their same classrooms could create something so beautiful. The parents listened quietly, many with smiles of admiration. Even the teachers, who had seen hundreds of performances over the years, felt something special that night. The song told a story of falling, rising, finding light again. It was a story of second chances, of believing in oneself even when no one else does. It was Lena's story, though she never said it aloud. The piano said everything for her. As she played, her expression softened. Her shoulders relaxed, her movements flowed like water. She was no longer aware of the audience watching her. She didn't think about mistakes or judgment. She just played. With honesty, with love, with everything she had kept inside for years. Time seemed to stop. The music filled every corner of the room, wrapping everyone in its warmth. And then, as the final section approached, the melody began to slow. It became tender again, as if whispering goodbye. The last few notes hung in the air like a sigh. When the final chord faded, there was silence. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that comes after something sacred. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, slowly, the applause began. Quiet at first, then louder and louder still. The room erupted into cheers. People stood clapping, shouting her name. Some whistled, others wiped tears. The noise filled the hall, echoing off the walls. Lena sat there for a moment, breathing deeply, her hands still resting on the keys. She hadn't expected such a reaction. She smiled faintly and stood, bowing politely. The applause only grew louder. Her old piano teacher was among the first to stand. Her eyes were shining and her hands trembled slightly as she clapped. The principal followed, and soon everyone in the hall was on their feet. Lena's eyes glistened. She didn't cry, but her heart felt full, fuller than it had in years. After the applause began to fade, she stepped away from the piano and took the microphone gently. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice was calm, steady. "Music has always been something personal to me. I never imagined it would bring me here tonight. I just hope that, if there's anyone out there who's ever felt unseen or unheard, they know it's never too late to find what makes them shine." Her words were simple, but they hit deeply. The hall was quiet again, listening to every word. She placed the microphone back and gave one last smile before walking off stage. The crowd stood again, clapping as she disappeared behind the curtain. Backstage, she took a long breath and sat down on a small chair. Her hands trembled slightly now, not from nerves, but from the rush of everything that had just happened. The teacher came in moments later, her eyes still wet. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked over and hugged her. It was a long, genuine hug, the kind that didn't need words. When they finally pulled apart, the teacher said, "You didn't just play tonight. You spoke to every soul in that room." Lena smiled, her eyes soft. "I just played what I felt." "That's what great musicians do," the teacher said, her voice shaking slightly. "They make people feel what words can't express." Lena nodded, humbled. "Thank you for not stopping me that night at the reunion," she said. "If you hadn't, I might never have played again." The teacher smiled faintly. "Sometimes life gives us moments we don't see coming. I'm just glad you took that chance." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People kept coming to congratulate her, students asking for pictures, parents thanking her for inspiring their children. The principal told her that her performance had raised more donations than they had hoped for. Everyone was talking about how moving it had been, but for Lena it wasn't about the praise. It was about something deeper, the quiet satisfaction that she had finally shared her truth. She had turned a memory of embarrassment into one of triumph. Later that night, when the hall was empty and the lights were being switched off, she returned to the stage one last time. The piano sat there silent again. She placed her hand on it and smiled softly. "Thank you," she whispered, almost to herself. She closed the lid gently and walked away, her steps light and peaceful. Outside, the night air was cool. The stars seemed to shimmer a little brighter, as if echoing her heart. Driving home, she thought about everything that had happened, the laughter at the reunion, the moment she decided to play, and now this. It felt as if life had come full circle. The girl who once avoided the stage had found her place on it. When she reached home, she sat at her own piano again, the familiar comfort waiting for her. She began to play softly, not the grand piece from the event, but a simple melody she made up on the spot. It was gentle, peaceful, full of gratitude. She closed her eyes and smiled. The world outside was quiet, but inside, her heart was alive with sound. She had learned something priceless, that every quiet person carries a story, and sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage to let it be heard. And in that small room, under the soft glow of a single lamp, Lena played on, not for applause, not for recognition, but simply because it was who she was. The days after the charity performance felt like a dream that Lena couldn't quite believe had happened. Every time she walked down the street, she caught herself smiling for no reason. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about the peace she finally felt inside. She had faced her past, and somehow, it had turned into something beautiful. Messages kept coming in from people who had attended the event. Some were from students who said her music inspired them to try again at something they'd given up on. Others were from teachers, who thanked her for reminding them why they taught in the first place. One message said simply, "You made us feel something real." Lena reread that one a few times, her heart full. Her old piano teacher called her 2 days later. Her voice was soft, almost emotional. "Lena, I can't stop thinking about that performance," she said. It's like the whole hall was alive. I haven't felt that kind of energy in years. Lena laughed gently. I just played what I felt. The teacher paused, then said, "We're planning another event next month, a music evening for the community. Would you consider performing again? I think people would love to hear you." Lena hesitated for a moment, smiling at the thought. "I'd love to," she said finally. The teacher laughed in relief. "Good. I'll save you the best spot." That night, as Lena sat at her piano, she thought about everything that had happened: the reunion, the charity concert, the people who had changed their opinion of her. It all felt surreal, but beneath all the excitement there was something else, a quiet strength that she hadn't noticed before. She no longer felt like she was trying to prove anything. She simply wanted to share what she loved. Weeks passed quickly, and soon the night of the community concert arrived. The same hall that once held awkward reunions and laughter now looked more elegant than ever. The lighting was soft and warm, and the rows of chairs stretched to the back of the room. The place was full. Families, friends, teachers, and students had come to see the performances. And more than anything, to hear Lena play again. As she walked through the backstage door, she could hear the low hum of conversation from the audience. Her name was mentioned again and again in excited whispers. Some people had come because they had heard about her from others. Others had seen her play at the last event and wanted to experience it again. The anticipation filled the air like electricity. Lena's teacher greeted her near the piano. "You ready?" she asked, smiling warmly. Lena nodded. "Yes, I feel calm this time." The teacher chuckled. "That's how you know you're where you belong." The program began with a few student performances. Young children playing simple melodies, older students singing or playing instruments. Each performance earned applause and smiles from the audience. There was joy in the air, the kind that comes from seeing people express something real. When it was finally Lena's turn, the host announced her name. "Our next performer is someone who has reminded us that talent has no time limit, and that passion can change everything. Please welcome Lena." As she walked onto the stage, a wave of applause greeted her. The lights felt warm on her face, and the soft murmur of admiration followed her to the piano. She took a deep breath and sat down, letting her fingers rest lightly on the keys. The audience fell into complete silence. This time she chose a piece she had written herself, one that carried both her journey and her gratitude. It began quietly, a gentle rhythm that filled the hall like the sound of rain. Each note shimmered in the air, delicate but full of emotion. People listened closely, drawn in by the beauty of her touch. The melody moved slowly at first, telling a story without words. It spoke of the quiet years she spent learning, of the loneliness that once felt endless, of the discovery that came when she found her own rhythm. Her old teacher watched from the front row, her eyes glistening. She knew what those notes meant. Every hesitation, every pause, every rise and fall of sound. It wasn't just a performance. It was a message. Lena was telling her story again, not with words, but with music that carried the truth of her soul. As the song deepened, Lena closed her eyes. The sound grew richer, fuller. The melody lifted and swirled like a conversation between her heart and the world. There was power in it, not loud or forceful, but the kind that made people stop breathing for a moment. The kind that moved something inside you. And then, as she reached the middle of the piece, something happened that she hadn't expected. The hall's doors opened quietly, and a small group of students walked in late. They were from a local school, their teacher guiding them to the back row. They found their seats quickly, but as soon as Lena's music reached them, they froze, mesmerized. Even from the back, they could feel it, the strength, the emotion, the truth in the notes. One of the girls whispered softly, "It sounds like she's telling a story." Another replied, "I think she is." Back on stage, Lena continued to play, unaware of the whispers, lost in her own rhythm. The song shifted, becoming brighter like sunlight breaking through clouds. The sadness melted into hope. The quiet grew into something larger. The entire hall seemed to breathe with her. People leaned forward, caught in the spell of her music. The teacher in the front row pressed a hand to her heart, overwhelmed. The principal wiped his eyes quietly. Even those who didn't fully understand music could feel something. A warmth, a recognition of their own hidden dreams. When Lena reached the final notes, she slowed her hands. letting the sound fade into a long, delicate silence. For a moment, no one moved. The air was still heavy with emotion. Then, all at once, the hall erupted. The applause was thunderous, louder than before, louder than any performance that night. People stood up, clapping, cheering, some even shouting her name. The walls shook with the sound. The standing ovation lasted for minutes that felt like forever. Lena sat there, eyes wide, her heart pounding. Her teacher stood up too, tears streaming down her cheeks, clapping the hardest. The host returned to the stage, shaking his head in amazement. I think we all just witnessed something truly special. Lena stood slowly and bowed, smiling humbly. Her voice caught for a moment when she spoke into the microphone. Thank you. I didn't think my music would reach this far. I just wanted to share a piece of my heart. The audience responded with another wave of applause, and for a moment, Lena couldn't hear anything else. The sound filled her ears, her chest, her entire being. She felt weightless. When she walked backstage, her hands trembled again, just like the first time. Her teacher rushed to her, pulling her into another hug. You did it again, she whispered. You touched every soul in that room. Lena smiled, her eyes wet but glowing. It's still hard to believe. The teacher laughed softly. Believe it. That's what real music does. It finds its way into people's hearts and stays there. They stood there for a while, just breathing in the energy of the moment. Around them, people were still talking excitedly, some even waiting near the stage to meet her. The evening had become something unforgettable. Not just another concert, but a moment people would talk about for a long time. Later, when most of the crowd had left and the stage lights were dimmed, Lena walked back out alone. The hall was quiet now, only the faint hum of the lights breaking the silence. She ran her hand across the piano again, her reflection faintly visible on its surface. She thought about the little girl she once was, sitting in that same hall years ago, too shy to speak, too unsure to try. She smiled softly. We made it, she whispered. Her teacher approached quietly behind her. They'll remember this night, she said gently. Not because of what you played, but because of how you made them feel. Lena nodded. That's all I ever wanted. As they left the hall together, Lena felt the cool night air on her skin. The stars above seemed brighter, clearer. The noise of the city had faded away, replaced by a quiet stillness. She felt grounded, calm, and more alive than ever. When she reached home, she didn't feel the need to play that night. Instead, she sat by her window, sipping tea and thinking about everything that had led to this point. The years of silence, the moments of doubt, the courage it took to say yes when she wanted to say no. She realized that what people had seen as sudden talent was really years of hidden effort. Every late night at the piano, every wrong note, every tear had built up to these moments. She had learned that sometimes life doesn't need you to shout to be noticed. It only asks you to stay true to what you love. She turned off the lights and looked at the piano in the corner of her room. It seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. She smiled. The applause still echoed faintly in her memory, but what stayed with her most wasn't the noise. It was the quiet feeling after it ended. The feeling of peace, of finally being seen, not as the quiet girl who faded into the background, but as someone who had something to give to the world. And as she drifted to sleep, she felt sure of one thing. The music had changed her life, but more than that, it had reminded everyone who heard it that true beauty often comes from those who once felt invisible. The weeks after the concert passed quietly, yet the echo of that night stayed with everyone who had been there. People in town still spoke about it, how a quiet woman walked onto the stage and turned a simple evening into something unforgettable. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about how her courage had reminded them that it's never too late to surprise the world, or yourself. Lena, however, went back to her usual life. She still woke up early, still made her morning tea, still practiced at her piano, but something inside her had changed. She felt lighter, freer. There was a peace in her heart that hadn't been there before. Every time her fingers touched the keys, she smiled softly. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about gratitude. Her phone buzzed constantly, people wanting to meet, invitations to perform at local events, interviews from small community stations. She appreciated the attention, but she didn't chase it. She had learned long ago that not every beautiful thing needs a spotlight. Sometimes it's enough that it exists. One morning, as she was tidying her small living room, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, she was surprised to see her old piano teacher standing there with a gentle smile. "Good morning," the teacher said warmly, holding a small box. Lena blinked in surprise. "Oh, please come in." The teacher stepped inside, looking around the cozy home. The air smelled faintly of tea and old sheet music. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said. "Not at all," Lena replied, gesturing for her to sit. "Would you like some tea?" The teacher nodded, settling onto the couch. Her eyes roamed over the small room. The piano by the window, the soft light spilling across the floor, the stacks of music sheets neatly arranged on the side. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Peaceful," Lena smiled. "It's my little world." They talked for a while, about the concert, about how people still mentioned her performance, about the students who had been inspired to start lessons again. Then the teacher placed the small box on the table between them. "I brought you something," she said. Lena looked at it curiously. It was a wooden box with an old-fashioned latch. She opened it slowly and found a gold brooch shaped like a treble clef inside. It was simple but elegant. "It's beautiful," Lena whispered. "You didn't have to—" The teacher interrupted softly. "It belonged to my teacher. She gave it to me when I finished my training. I want you to have it now." Lena looked up in surprise. "Are you sure?" The teacher nodded, her voice warm but emotional. "Yes, you've become the kind of musician every teacher dreams of. Not just because you play beautifully, but because you play honestly. That's something even talent can't replace." Lena's eyes glistened. She closed the box gently, her hands trembling a little. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "That means more to me than you know." For a few moments, neither spoke. The air was still, filled with quiet understanding. Then the teacher said, "I also came to ask you something. The school wants to start a small music program again, not just for children, but for anyone who wants to learn. Would you help me lead it?" Lena blinked, caught off guard. "You mean teach?" The teacher smiled. "Yes, you have something special to share. I think you could help others the same way music helped you." Lena thought about it for a long moment. Teaching had never crossed her mind. She'd always been the student, the one who struggled to express herself. But now the idea didn't feel impossible. It felt right. "I'd love to," she said finally. The teacher smiled wider. "I was hoping you'd say that." That afternoon, after the teacher left, Lena sat at her piano and stared out the window. Outside, the world looked the same. People walking by, the hum of cars, the soft rustle of trees. But something inside her had shifted. She realized she wasn't just a pianist anymore. She was part of something larger. She could now help others find the courage she once thought she didn't have. The first class started 2 weeks later. It wasn't fancy, just a small group of students in the same old school music room. The piano had been polished, and the air carried the faint smell of chalk and new beginnings. Lena stood by the instrument, watching as a group of curious faces filled the seats. Some were children, some adults. A few seniors who had always dreamed of playing but never tried. She smiled at them, remembering the girl she once was, sitting quietly in that same room, afraid to make a sound. "Welcome," she said softly. "Let's make some music together." The weeks turned into months. Every class became a small adventure. Wrong notes, laughter, moments of frustration and joy. Lena learned how to guide them gently, how to turn hesitation into rhythm, how to celebrate even the smallest progress. The students adored her. They said she made them feel safe, that she made music feel like something alive. One evening, after a long day of teaching, she sat at the piano alone in the classroom. The sun was setting outside, painting the walls in shades of gold and orange. She played softly, not for anyone else, just for herself. The melody was simple, something she had been working on for a while. As she played, she heard a quiet voice from the doorway. "That's beautiful." It was her teacher standing there with a gentle smile. Lena smiled back. "It's something new." "It sounds like hope," the teacher said softly. Lena paused, then nodded. "That's what it feels like." The teacher walked closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've grown so much. I can see it in the way you play. You used to hold everything back, but now you give it away freely. That's what real art is." Lena looked at her teacher, the person who had once doubted her, and felt no resentment, only gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." The teacher shook her head. No, Lena, thank you. You reminded me why I started teaching. You reminded me that everyone deserves a chance to be heard. They stood there for a while, the room filled with the soft echo of the final notes. It was a full circle moment. The quiet student and the once demanding teacher, now equals bound by the same love for music. Over the next few years, the program grew. More students joined. Some of Lena's students even performed at local events, carrying forward the same spark she had once found. She never stopped learning either. Every time someone asked how she became so good, she smiled and said, "By never giving up when it felt too late." And people listened because they knew her story. They knew that behind her calm smile was a lifetime of patience, struggle, and quiet determination. One day, years later, she was invited back to that same grand hall, the one where it all began. It was being renovated, and they wanted her to play the final performance before it closed for restoration. The request made her smile. It felt like a chapter ending just the way it should. When the night arrived, the hall was full again. Familiar faces filled the crowd. Her old teacher, her students, friends, neighbors, even strangers who had once heard her play and never forgotten it. As she stepped onto the stage, she felt a wave of calm wash over her. The same hall that once made her nervous now felt like home. She sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The piece she chose was the same one she'd played years before, the one that had made the hall erupt in applause. But this time, it sounded different. Softer, wiser, fuller. Each note carried the weight of everything she'd lived since then. As she played, she thought about her younger self, the shy girl who once stood at the edge of this stage, unsure if she belonged. She thought about her teacher, who had once doubted her but later believed in her more than anyone. She thought about every person who had ever felt small and unseen, and she played for them. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was deep and full, not empty, but peaceful. Then, once again, the audience rose to their feet. The applause rolled through the hall, strong and joyful. Her teacher was the first to stand, clapping with tears in her eyes. Her students joined in, cheering, some waving from their seats. Lena looked out at them. Her heart full, she smiled, bowed deeply, and whispered a quiet thank you to the piano, to the hall, to life itself. As she walked off stage, her teacher met her backstage holding out a small velvet box. Inside was the same gold brooch, now engraved on the back with a single word: Grace. Lena touched it gently, her eyes glistening. Grace, she repeated softly. Her teacher nodded. Because that's what you've shown us all. Grace in silence, grace in patience, grace in your music. Lena smiled through her tears. It's all I ever wanted to share. They hugged, and in that moment everything felt complete. The pain, the doubts, the long years of quiet work. It had all led here to this final note, this piece. Outside, the night sky stretched wide and calm, full of stars. As Lena stepped out of the hall for the last time, the cool air brushed her face. She looked up, breathed deeply, and smiled. She knew that somewhere, someone was listening, maybe a young student, maybe someone who'd once been told they weren't enough. And maybe, just maybe, her story would remind them that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the quietest hearts. And with that thought, she walked home, her heart light, her steps steady, her soul at peace.